you guys have ever been injured from your instrument? How many of you? Wow, okay, so a good chunk. So one of the things that happened to me when I was a junior in college, I went to Carnegie Mellon. I was a junior, and I was playing a lot of French horn. I was practicing lots and lots and lots of hours a day. And I started to lose feeling in my fingers. And I started to lose feeling in my pinky finger and my ring finger. And what happened is I started to obviously investigate this and try to figure this out. And what I found out was through talking to my teacher and talking to a lot of other people that not a lot of people actually talk about injuries when you're a musician. The second thing, I don't know if you guys know about me, some of the older guys might, is that I played college and tennis. I played tennis in college, and so through that, I also had several athletic injuries too. When I was in high school, I had a lot of rotator cuff problems, and one of the things that I found out from that was I went with my parents and my coach, and I had to see a lot of sports doctors and sports therapists for that injury. And so what I found out from that injury was I used a lot of things in my daily life were affecting my tennis career. And so my parents had a big help in helping me figure out what happened in that particular situation. And the doctor said, well, go in while she's asleep at night and actually watch how she sleeps. And it turns out that I was sleeping like this and it was just all over the place when I was asleep. My hands were, and they would move throughout the night. And so for quite a chunk of time, I actually slept. I had to sleep with things holding my arms by my side so that I would learn to then rest my shoulder and not keep it in a kind of an awkward position, which then in turn helped heal it. So when I would go play tennis, my rotator cuff was taken care of. And so taking this back to my music injury from my French horn, I had to kind of look at my daily life, not only from an internal perspective, like what could I do better as a horn player or differently as a horn player to change this, but also what could I do in my just daily life, driving and working at the computer and things like that. And so what I started to learn from both of these two experiences is that there's a world of something called ergonomics, which I had no idea about. And through this, I also realized that the way an athlete takes care of themselves and the way a musician takes care of themselves are fairly different. Like, how many of you guys have exercised more than 3 times this week? Only? Oh, that's actually pretty good. Okay, I'm impressed. Usually when we do this class, it's not that high. But and so what I learned from these two things was that musicians don't always take care of themselves, and there's a lot of things out there that maybe you don't know about, maybe your teachers don't talk to you about, that you can kind of look into if you're somebody who's experienced injury from your instrument. And this brought me to another interesting point, which is that the term music medicine and the term sports medicine came about in 2 different parts of the 1900s. The term sports medicine came about in 1928, and the term music medicine came about in 1982. So it's quite a long way from, I feel like the music world is always a little bit behind most other career paths, and particularly behind the sports world. And we do a lot of things just the same as they do. We work just as hard, we practice just as hard, we perform just as often, if not sometimes more often. So we have to kind of look at that as well. So what we're going to talk about today is ergonomics, and it's a little bit from an athletic perspective towards ergonomics, and also how that relates to injury prevention. So I did a study back in 2010, and I sent a survey out to over 600 professional musicians, and what I asked them was, do musicians need more education about injury prevention? And I got a whopping 80% said that they would like more education. I've done this talk, I guess now over the last 4 or 5 years a couple of times, and what I've learned every time I go back to kind of prep for this talk, I just Google ergonomics and Google musician ergonomics and different kind of variations of that. And what I've found, which is a great thing, is that over the years, there's more and more and more information on the internet about it, which I think is great. In the same survey, I asked how many of those same musicians have had pain or injury when they played, and 76.2% said that they did have pain. So what I kind of put in my own kind of circle of our life is that we all want to be healthy musicians. I don't think any of us here want to be injured. But what you have to kind of take into account is that when you're a musician, whether you're a healthy musician, you're going to have habits. Some of those habits are good habits, some of those habits are bad habits. And from there, if you don't take care of yourself and kind of look at all these factors, then it can lead to being injured. And from there, you're in this struggle to kind of get back to being a healthy musician again. So then you have to, seek help, look at things you can change, and then hopefully you'll get back to where we all want to be, which is a healthy musician. So first things we should do is actually define the term ergonomics. And I found two definitions that I really like. The first is the study of people's efficiency in their working environment, looking at both physical stress and environmental stress. What do you guys think physical stress would be? Does anybody want to take? I mean, there's no real wrong answers to it, but does anybody want to take any shots at it? Physical stress? Yeah. Yeah, practicing. Anybody else? Basically anything that's taking stress on any of your joints, your bones, your muscles, any of that stuff is physical stress on your body. Environmental stress we have to also look at, which are just as important, and that is like temperature in a room. How small is the room? How loud are you playing? How loud is the ensemble playing? All these things actually come into play. And the second definition of ergonomics that I found and I really liked is the science of designing the job to fit the worker, not forcing the worker to fit the job. And that is, I can't tell you how many of my own colleagues and how many students that come to see me, they come to play their instrument and they're just really bringing themselves to their instrument. And I don't know if a lot of you guys have been seeing part of our wellness team up in 653, Aaron Carr and Kate Fox and Miles Spar. But if you've been seeing any of those, I've been hearing a lot of people take their instrument into those sessions with them, and they're actually helping you kind of learn how to bring the instrument to you versus bringing the instrument to yourself, which I thought was pretty cool. So that's those two definitions of ergonomics, I feel like pretty well describe kind of what it is. And so another question for y'all, what job tasks do you feel like have high ergonomic risk factors? Does anybody have any thoughts on that one? Like what jobs in the world? What are some of the, most hardest jobs, deadliest jobs? Does anybody watch Deadliest Catch? Okay, all right. So Alaskan crab fishing, that's pretty deadly. That has high ergonomic risk factor, right? My cousin, her boyfriend, he's an underwater welder, and in my opinion, that has pretty high ergonomic risk factors, right? And so he has to put on the suit, and he has to know how to dive. He has to stay in good shape. There's a lot of things that are involved with him being in, and then also he has to know how to deal with all the equipment down there and whatnot. So in my opinion, that's also a fairly high risk job. And I looked up just what are the deadliest jobs on the planet or highest ergonomic risk factors, and the other one was logging. That's actually the number one because you have to climb the tree, and you're attached to the tree, and there's all kind of problems with that. So those are jobs with extremely high ergonomic risk factors. Back in 1970, Congress decided to put together, they enacted this thing called the Occupational Safety and Health Act, which from that, there's a thing called OSHA. I don't know if you guys have heard of OSHA before, but it's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. So that came from the act. And what was happening, if you kind of look back in that time in history, there had been a huge industrial revolution going on from, the late 1800s through the early 1900s. And so what Congress decided to do is they needed to create this act to take care of the laborers. And so from that, what you'll find is if there's any paid job in the United States, the company has to abide by OSHA guidelines. And for you guys, that also means, to me, it's kind of a boring topic if you think about it, but for us as musicians, you have to look at it from the standpoint that when you go into the working force, when you go into an orchestra, they also have to abide by OSHA guidelines. And so the mission of OSHA is to help employers and employees reduce on-the-job injuries, illnesses, and deaths, okay? So hopefully, none of that happens to us on the job. But one of the things that I found really fascinating is if you look at OSHA's guidelines on their website, these are the things that they say, and they don't have very many factors, but these are the ergonomic risk factors that are found. So the first one being repetitive, forceful, or prolonged exertion of the hands, performing the same or similar task repetitively, frequent or heavy lifting, pushing, pulling, or carrying of heavy objects, working in awkward postures or being in the same posture for long periods of time, performing job-related tasks in cold environments, and combined exposure to several of those factors. Now, how many of you guys feel like as musicians we fall into all of those categories every single day, right? So if you look at the guidelines, I feel like we fall under that. So it's even more important that we take more care of ourselves, than probably some people even think we need to. One of the things I was fortunate enough to get to go on tour with this thing called Star Wars in Concert, where we got to go all over the country and play Star Wars, like the whole movie, and it was a 2-hour program. But one of the things they did with us when we first got on tours, they handed us this thing called the MSDS sheet, which is a material safety data sheet. And it basically tells us everything that you're going to encounter when you're doing Star Wars in Concert. And so they had lasers going, and they had smoke coming at us and all these different things. And at first I was like, well, this is weird. But then I realized that they were abiding by OSHA guidelines. And one of the things as a brass player we had to look at was, are we okay with all this stuff going on? So they were doing their job. And for us, it fell into this category. Kind of how this all relates back to us as musicians is the way I see it is that you've got ergonomics, which helps us not, be preventative from injury. And in order to kind of have that, you also need to know a little bit about anatomy and have a kinesthetic awareness, kind of knowing how your body works. And also you have to figure out how to improve yourself and improve your instrument. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start looking at different parts of the body and kind of learning a little bit about the anatomy, and we're going to learn some different things different instruments. Now we could spend, an hour and a half on every single instrument if we wanted to. So we're going to try to cover as many of the different instruments as we can and talk about, what ways you can make the instrument more ergonomic so that it fits you better, and also talk about things that you could do when you practice to help depending on that particular part of the body. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is the arm and the hand, okay? So you've got 3 main nerves that run through your arm and your hand. One is called the median nerve, one's called the ulnar nerve, and one's called the radial nerve. And the nerves, what happens is they run through they basically have a little tunnel that runs down your arm. Each nerve has a tunnel. And in that tunnel, if you've got overuse, or maybe you've or if you've aggravated it somehow, the nerve will actually get inflamed in the tunnel, or maybe the tendons around the nerve get inflamed. And so that leads to different things like carpal tunnel syndrome, also ulnar nerve entrapment, different things like that some people experience. And what happens with that is usually you get like a tingling in your hand. And so this goes back to what I was telling you guys before. That was one of my symptoms, is I couldn't feel, like if I touched my fingers back when I was in college, if I touched these 3 fingers, I literally couldn't feel anything at the ends of them. And so, so that was definitely alarming to me. So if we take just the radial nerve and just take a look at that one, it actually runs over the top of your arm, and it deals with your thumb, your index finger, and your 3rd finger from the top. And so that one runs up here, and sometimes different people wear too tight of jewelry, or maybe they wear too tight of a watch, and sometimes that will actually aggravate that nerve. But I have to say, most of the time for musicians, we don't usually have too many problems with the radial nerve. It's usually the other 2, the ulnar nerve and the median nerve, that we deal with most of the time if there are injuries. So if you look at the median nerve, this is the one that people complain about with carpal tunnel. So if you've ever heard like a secretary, talk about they've been sitting at the desk for a long time and they maybe have carpal tunnel, it's because of this, they're having trouble with the median nerve. One of the things you guys need to know, and this is, again, the ergonomic piece of it, is that there's a neutral position of the hand and the arm. And that is, it literally is down by your side, and that means the elbow's not bent, the wrist isn't bent, and the hands are actually almost like in a C form. And so that's what they call neutral position of the arms. So if you take a look at how I was practicing my horn every day, right? I have my arm here. So what I was doing is I was basically cutting off, cutting off the nerve supply into those fingers, and I was practicing, 2-3 hours a day for long periods of time, and I wasn't taking any breaks. And so that over time, what was happening is that was cutting off the feeling into my fingers. And so that one falls into the ulnar nerve category, which was the one that I had trouble with. So that one really gets irritated a lot by the arm being bent. The median nerve, the one we just looked at before that, is aggravated by the wrist being bent. Does that make sense to everybody? So you have to kind of look at your instrument and say, well, what do I do the most of? Do I bend my wrist? Do I bend my wrist? Do I bend my arms? You know, and that's kind of where you have to be careful of those particular nerves, depending on what you do most of. So does anybody have any questions about that so far? Good. Okay. So let's take a look then at a couple of pictures. So this website at the bottom, there's several photographs that I've taken from this website, and I have to say this one didn't exist the last couple of times I've done this lecture, and it's fantastic. It goes through every instrument of the orchestra and talks about ergonomic things you could do to help each instrument. So if you want to look more into it, I would recommend checking out this particular website. But for all those players with bow, that use a bow, just take note of, again, we were talking about the neutral position of the hand and how a C form is better than maybe like a completely straight hand, or at least in the photo on the left-hand side. Again, I'm not a string player, so I have no idea about some of these things, but most teachers teach. Is that how they teach, most teachers? Okay. And the other thing I've learned, too, from teaching lots and lots of young students and adult students is that they come to you with a lot of really weird habits. And so a lot of this ergonomic stuff also goes back into how you need to teach. And this is why they teach you what they teach you, hopefully. So the next picture is another, so the arm that's actually, I don't know, what do you guys call that? Not bowing, but just moving the left hand. And so, I don't know. So if you take a look at the picture again on your right, that's the correct position versus the one that, the one thing you want to make sure of when you're looking at your hand positions, and we even have to look at this on brass players as well, is the distance between your hands, or your fingers. And so what you want to make sure of is that you're not stretching out the distance between your fingers a whole lot. Pianists probably have to worry about this as well. But for instance, for French horn, we have to look at that. And so a lot of times they'll take this hook and they'll actually move it up. So our fingers are more close together versus like really, really, really spread out, because it puts a lot of strain on your fingers. So also, if you look at this photo, you can see you've got, what we'd call extreme wrist position, so she's not in neutral, versus the one with Gail Shaham. Yeah?
That last picture you showed with the pinky, what if you double jointed in the pinky? And even though I've tried to fix it, it's still really...
Yeah, some people have what they call hyper extension of certain joints, and you're kind of in some ways lucky. In that, because you're naturally born that way. Does that make sense? So there are some things you have to be more careful of. Like you might want to do some work to strengthen certain things. But and there's a book here that actually goes into that. You might want to check it out, actually, Dylan, if you want. But it goes into hyperextension of certain of certain joints. But that is a good question. Some people are double jointed and they can, it looks more like one than the other. And from what I've read, it's actually okay as long as you're really conscious of it and you make everything else within that strong. Does that make sense? Yeah. So obviously we want the picture on the right, not the picture on the left. So this is another example for the pianist. It's again, if you go back to the neutral position, you're looking for the more C position of the hand, right? Versus anything that doesn't look like that. Same thing for brass players, French horn. So obviously for us, we have to worry about, the same thing, the wrist position, making sure it's neutral as much as you can. And also with the finger position, same thing is, so you again want curled fingers versus flat fingers. And because otherwise you're hyperextending your fingers this way. I'm assuming for pianists, you guys, I've never really seen a professional pianist that has flat fingers, but it's the same type of thing. And so you want curled fingers for that. For the percussionist, one thing they talk about is making sure that your arm, when you're sitting, that your arm is basically at 90 degrees or the angle is larger than that. So these would be more of ergonomic angles as a percussionist versus keeping your hands up the whole time, because that's obviously, playing horn for me, you're going to put more stress on the ulnar nerve in that situation. So let's talk about some solutions for those type of things. So let's say that you've looked at your body and you've kind of dealt with as much as you possibly can for yourself. Some things you might want to check out, and these just apply to winds and brass players, but are like key extensions or things that make it a little bit easier for you with your instrument. So for French horn, they would actually add like dimes to this part, or maybe buttons to that. Flute players, they'll add, or almost all clarinet, almost all woodwinds, they'll add actual extensions to your keys. Trombones have this thing called the slide saver. Have any of you guys ever used? Never used that? It's usually for like really young kids that they can throw out to 7th position. They had this yeah. It's like they have this thing that they can grab onto. And then for us, we also have this thing called the flipper or the foot, which gives you a little bit extra help. And then the same kind of idea for clarinet, oboe, have the same thing. And then neck straps for certain instruments to take a little bit more weight off your hands. How many of you guys actually use ergonomic solutions on your instrument? Some people? Okay. So not very many, but some. I mean, anybody that uses a shoulder rest, yeah, is using an ergonomic. You'll see that in a second, but yeah, is using an ergonomic solution. So let's talk about ways you guys could practice more to help with your arms and your hands. So I took this excerpt, which for bassoonists is obviously really a notey excerpt, and you see them, at least for me, I've seen them work it out a lot of times when it has to get so fast for the Marriage of Figaro. And so what are some ways you could work to kind of help out your hands and your arms when you're doing something like this? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? What could you do? Practice in front of a mirror. That's really good. So like watch yourself. How about practice it slowly, right? You know, I always feel like that's the number one thing I'm always telling my students, practice it slowly, practice it slowly. Some other things I came up with are slow practice, just bracketing. I mean, you guys all know this, you're at this level already, but bracketing spots that, you know, you need to work on more. And a lot of this stuff, too, for when you start teaching, this is really important to give to your students, because they also, you know, they won't know all these different things, and it will help them just improve at a faster rate, too. But also repeat the passage only if it's getting better. And then take breaks, make sure you stretch. That was one thing I wasn't doing. So when I got injured, I was literally trying to do all my practice in like 3 hours, get it all done. I wasn't taking any breaks. I was sitting in the practice room the whole time, and then I would finally get up and leave. And you know, it was not a healthy situation. And then also visualize playing without your instrument. I don't know how many of you guys do this already, but it's a thing I took from my sports background, where, you know, there was just times when I wouldn't have time to practice, and I would just pretend like I was either just mentally, or with my horn in my hand, just go through the motions of that. So that's something else you guys can do. I wanted to talk really quick. How many of you guys have read this book? It's called The Talent Code. Has anybody read that yet? So just a couple people. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was how the brain relates to the body. And the Talent Code's a great book. There's basically two, there's a sequel to it called The Little Book of Talent. And what the author has done is he's gone out and studied different pools of just people that are very talented. Like he went to certain parts of the world, like where all the soccer players were, or you know, maybe where all the, like he went to South America, or he'd go to Canada and check out all the hockey players. And so what he did was try to figure out kind of what is happening and why are all these people as successful as they are. And so kind of what he describes was something that finally for me answered the question of why does everybody say practice slowly? Like, what is exactly happening in your body when your teacher tells you to practice slowly? So what is happening is that you have some idea, whatever that idea may be. Maybe you're going to practice a passage. Maybe you're going to pick up your instrument, whatever that may be. And so from there, you've got neurons in your brain that are like, they're communicating through a junction that's called a synapse. And then they travel down the synapse and gets into your nervous system. From there, you're going to go perform the idea. But the thing that I didn't know is there's this thing called myelin, which wraps around the synapse. And the more times you do a certain exercise, the stronger the myelin gets. It's like a spider web almost. It just gets stronger and stronger. So then it fires faster and faster and faster. And so that's why if you ever hear the, like, you know, practice 10,000 hours thing, you'll get really great if you practice 10,000 hours. That's why, is because over all this time, that myelin has to create this really fast path, this pathway that when you want to do a certain task, it gets really quick, and then you can do it on command when you need to. So for me, that kind of explained why all the, why is it that when you practice slowly, and really efficiently and smart, that, that it really does make you have a better skill set. So from the arm and the hand, we're going to move on now to the spine and the back. And a couple things to just take note of the spine and the back is you've obviously got the bone, right? You've also got the spinal column, and then you've which is all the nerves and whatnot within the spine. And then between the bone of the spine, you've also got the discs, right? And so the spine is home for your central nervous system. All your nerves are there, right? And the discs, which I found pretty fascinating, are like jelly donuts. So if you're leaning way forward, what you're doing is you're compressing one side of all those discs when you lean forward. And if you lean backward, you're compressing on the back side of all those discs as you lean backward. And so, I always like describing this because everybody starts moving around. So one of the things you have to take note of is, particularly when we're playing our instrument, right, every day for several, many hours a day, is what position are you putting your spine in all that time that you're doing this particular activity. And so you need to make sure that's why we need to make sure we get up and down. Maybe you practice sitting, you practice standing sometime, and so you do different variations on how you're practicing. And one of the sad things that I found out about your spinal column is that around the time you turn 20, from that point forward, for the rest of your life, the discs in your back start to deteriorate, and they slowly deteriorate, and they basically get, I know it's kind of sad, and they get harder and harder, and so that's why you see elderly people that are all hunched over. A lot of times, some people say that's genetic, and sometimes people say that some say that it's genetic, and some say it's just from basically poor posture all your life. So that's why you want to make sure that you really take as good of care of your spine as you can, and that's why a lot of people say to exercise, move around when you practice, do standing, do sitting practice, and just give your discs some time to take strain off of both sides of them, so that you're not compressing one or the other. So if we look at just different pictures of this. So if you look, basically these are mimicking each other, but it's poor back posture, right? So you're seeing what's happening is if you look at the disc on your right, you can see how it's a little bit coming or bulging at the back of it. And the one thing too to make sure you're thinking of as well is that your neck is connected to your spine. So all of that. Make sure that that you're taking into account your neck and your spine at the same time when you're practicing sitting, driving, all of these things. And then also the so this is so you can see here that it's putting more strain on the neck. You can see how forward the neck is coming for both the pianist and the horn player. And so one of the things you want to check on is that it's, again, are you bringing the biggest question is, are you bringing yourself to the instrument, or are you bringing the instrument to you? That's always a question to ask yourself when you're in the practice room. Another thing is shoulder height, and shoulder height is directly related to hip height and vice versa. So if you have one hip that's higher than the other, or if you have one shoulder that's higher than the other, it's usually going to pull on one side of your body or the other. And if you look at most of our instruments, most of them are asymmetric instruments, right? And we're built to be pretty symmetric. So what you want to make sure of is that, if you're playing violin all the time, right, I don't know what for you guys, what shoulder, is it this shoulder that would be higher than the other one? I don't even know. It could be either. For horn players, it is our left shoulder. So if you ever go to a French horn conference, one of the things I like to look at is like how many people are actually walking around that literally look like that, and they don't even know it, So when you're playing your instrument, just check out, take notice as to, are your hips, how are your hips doing? How are your feet doing? How are your shoulders doing? All these things, fall into place. Another thing you want to check out is how far forward are you coming as well, right? So for us, some instruments don't necessarily have to worry about the forward part of it as much, but, people with distance, like pianists, drummers, horn players for sure. I would imagine cellists as well. So just check on how far forward are you coming to your instrument. And obviously you can see here that the bell position is a huge thing. And whenever I teach little kids, you'd be surprised at the number of them that come in with their bell like all over the place. And so for me, I have to make sure and get it to a place where it's fitting them as well as it can. So one of the things that we should always take a look at is chairs. And that has a huge effect on how you're sitting, how your posture will be, how if your feet can touch the ground, all of those different things. And so Wenger, the company, makes a whole bunch of different versions of chairs, and I pulled all of these out so you guys can see the difference. So we've got the one on this one, the silver chair, right? This one with the silver legs, the kind of metallic-y silver legs. That's the shortest of all the ones I think we have at Colburn. And then it goes all the way up to the cello chair, which the cello chair and kind of the other silver leg chair, those are about the same height, but I think the cello chair is just the tiniest little bit taller than this chair. So you can, to me it makes a huge difference. So when I practice, I always want to find for this one for me, because I'm obviously short. So I need this chair. And so for me, the chairs make a huge difference. And if you haven't thought of that, if you want after class, feel free to come up and try them all. Last year, I remember one of the trombonists, after we talked about chairs, we probably spent 30 minutes looking at all the chairs for him. And so I think he picks it out every time for orchestra. And some people even use the piano benches over here. And obviously you can change the height on those as well. But my all-time favorite chair that I've ever found is called the Tempo chair. And yeah, it's really cool. I'm glad you feel the same way. And so, but it sounds crazy to be talking about chairs, but it really does make a big difference. And the Tempo chair is cool because you can change a lot of different features about it. You can change the height of the back. You can change the height of the legs. Is there anything else I'm missing on it? The angle of the seat. Yeah, that's right. You can change the angle of the seat. So it's awesome. And the only place I've ever played with them is in San Diego Symphony. They had them down there. So, any place you get those, it's pretty cool. And then some people, there's a guy in town, he's a French horn player, but his name's Marty Reese, and he is designed, just for the regular old chair, he's designed kind of these little block things that you can put your chair on depending on, he just takes those with him versus always changing his chair. And so he'll take those and put them, he needs a different angle seat, and sometimes he wants, and so he'll use that instead. So he just carries the blocks with him. But there's all kinds of other stuff. There's this cushion thing, so you can get different versions of this. I bought this just so I can show people, but you obviously can see there's a fairly large angle to this cushion. But you can also get them there's a woman in LA that just custom makes them, and so you can get them so that they're just 1 inch all the way across or ½ an inch all the way across. She'll custom make them for you if that will help you. And then for me, I thought I'd show you guys this as well, because you can just see how big of an ergonomic difference. You might have to stand up to see this, but for me, whenever I play horn, if I were to actually sit down and play on my leg, and I were to bring the horn straight to me, this is where it hits, right? So can you guys see that? It hits right here on my chin. And so for me, I use this thing. It's called a watt lifter. And so if I put it on my bell, now it does change the sound a little bit, but I also play on my leg most of the time anyway. So it brings it now to my face. You guys see that? So for me, back to my injury, what happened was, it was several parts. It was that I was never giving my arm a rest, to neutral position. So I was never just kind of letting them hang by my side. And the second thing is I was basically lifting my leg up. So I would put my foot up to compensate for not, to basically keep my foot propped the entire rehearsal, the entire practice session. So I was then basically throwing off the level of my hips, the level of my shoulders, and it was putting a ton of pressure on this side of my body, particularly on the ulnar nerve. So it's also something to take into account. Some people use guitar stools. I just brought this for you to see. But my only concern with that is that, again, it's going to put one of your hips higher than the other one. So if you ever need that, I'd almost recommend getting blocks and putting certain blocks underneath, your feet to see if that helps on both sides. But there's a funny story about, so if you notice, my French horn is too short for my body, right? So there's the guy that was the former principal horn of the LA Phil. His problem was the opposite. So he used to build a little like pedestal box, and he would put that underneath his chair, so his legs were longer, and they would hit the floor. So his chair would be sitting on this pedestal box, and then his feet would hang past the box and actually hit the floor. And so they were filming, I think, The Soloist, the movie, and they were using the LA Phil guys, and so apparently they kept taking his box away because they didn't want him to be up on a platform, and he kept putting the box back, and it was just a whole big thing. But he was obviously very ergonomically conscious about how the horn needed to fit his body, and he had the opposite problem of me. So you can just see how important chairs are, how important items like that are. And so if we just take a look again, we were talking about chin rest for you guys. I don't know if anybody's actually read this book. Has anybody here read the book? It's called Violin and Viola Ergonomics. Has anybody ever seen that? Okay. Well, it came out on the market a couple years ago. And from the people that I've talked to that have actually read it, they say it's great. So y'all might want to, if anybody's having any major issues, you might want to check that out. Also, there's tons and tons and tons of different kinds of chin rests. A lot of these are just different colors, but then there are a couple of different ones at the bottom. So there's like gel ones, and like there's center mount ones, and all different kinds if you look at the bottom versions of them. So there's all different kinds of, for you guys, there's all different kinds of chin rests. And then I thought this was pretty cool. The former San Francisco Violas had this viola made for him, and so I don't know if any of you guys ever saw him play. I got to see him, but it's pretty cool looking. And then there's also different versions of it from there. So yeah, did anybody ever see that live? See this viola? Yeah, it's pretty cool. Basically, what it was is so you don't have to like the reach around the instrument. So that the reach around the instrument, and then also, I think it fit him better. Does that make sense? I mean, I don't play viola, but that would make sense to me. So, but yeah, so that's pretty cool, I thought. And they do it more for violas than violins because obviously violins are smaller, so they're just easier. But I did see this really cool. I guess it's an electric violin, but they took it's supposed to be the best ergonomic one, and it has a crazy huge chin rest that I guess is made out of this really fancy foam, and it's kind of like the same foam you sleep on, the memory foam, and I guess it's supposed to memorize where you are. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, so they look pretty cool. And then for the brass world, there's this thing called the Ergo Brass, which is like a thing called the pip stick. And so what you do, they're kind of funny, but so the pip stick actually goes, there's two versions of it. It goes all the way to the ground, and then there's another one that you actually put on your leg, and the Ergo Brass attaches to you around your waist. And so basically, they're like pivotal. The instrument literally sits on a pivot, and so you're actually not holding your arms and your hands aren't actually holding any of the weight. So these are kind of neat things. And back when I was at Carnegie Mellon, there was Sumner Erickson was the tuba player. I don't know have you heard of him, Gabe? He was this really rock and roll guy, and he was really into Alexander technique, and he won the job when he was like 19 out of Curtis or something. And but anyway, he was only there for a bunch of years, and then he decided to go play bass in a rock and roll band. But what the coolest thing about him was that he had this tuba stand, and so his tuba lived on this stand thing, and he would go sit down in the back of the orchestra and count his rests, and then he'd get up and he'd stand up, and he'd go to the tuba and bring the tuba to him, and he'd play the tuba, and then he'd put it back on the stand and go sit back down. So the tuba literally lived on this stand, and he would stand up and play the instrument. And because of the OSHA guidelines, they had to let him do this. I mean, it looked different, but yeah, so it was pretty cool. So Sumner had that option. So let's see, for pianists, I found this thing, which is kind of cool. They actually had a piano that they wrapped around so that you don't have to, so it wrapped around you. And so instead of reaching way over here and reaching way over here, then it was a little bit closer to your body. I don't know how the pianists actually feel about that, but it seemed cool. And then this is my favorite. For the bassoonist, they had this thing called the vonk. And that's a picture of the tuba stand. But the vonk, I guess it holds the weight of the instrument so you don't use the seat strap. And and so that's another option for the bassoon players, and that's what the tuba stand looked like. So he would use the standing version of it, not the sitting version, and he would stand and go play the tuba. And then this is, again, the bell extender that I showed you guys. And then some horn players also use this thing called a foot raiser. So, I mean, there's tons of different options that you can look into or use. But I thought this picture of Glenn Gould just kind of sums it all up in, like, just the worst, you know. I mean, this is just classic bringing yourself to your instrument, I thought. So, so yeah, so if we kind of recap the spine and back, you know, the number one thing is if you're, you know, our instruments make us asymmetric, right? So we have to kind of work on our symmetry. So a big part of that, if you aren't seeing the wellness team here, and to check them out, it's all free for you guys, and they do a lot of work on symmetry. I've been seeing Aaron Carr off and on, and also Kate Fox off and on, just to help me with my own symmetry, and it's amazing. Like they'll work with you on your instrument too, which I think is amazing. Use a mirror to check your posture. We were talking about that before. When I was in Aspen one summer, I was working with one of the horn teachers there, and his wife came and took a photo of our section while we were playing, and he came and looked at the photo, and he was appalled because he would play like way out here, and so he had probably never seen a photo of himself play for 10 years, and so he saw this photo of himself and was like, you know, holy cow, I can't believe I do that. So then he was working from that point to bring his instrument back to him. So it's kind of amazing. If you don't use a mirror to check yourself, if you don't video yourself or take pictures of yourself, you might not actually have any idea, particularly once you get out of college and you don't have a teacher checking it for you. And some teachers don't really check this stuff. You know, as long as some people just think as long as you sound good, it's fine. But sometimes it will, over time particularly, add up to an injury or something you don't want. And then alternate sitting and standing. We talked about that a bit. And then also just get out and exercise. That helps you get back to like your own symmetry. And then, you know, just moving and stretching and making sure you warm up. Why do you think it's important to warm up? Speaking of, does anybody know? I just thought, you know, it's something they always told me to do, warm up, so I'd always just warm up. But I was looking into it at one point, because I actually had a student ask me, well, why do I have to warm up? And what happens in your body, like the actual scientific thing that's happening, is that your body has a certain amount of like stored fuel. And so if you go running, or if you go, you know, if you play your instrument, it will start to get into that fuel source. And if you go too hard too soon, then what happens is it uses up that fuel source, and it needs to start reproducing new fuel. And if you don't warm up or kind of slowly get into it, then you won't get enough fuel going, and that's what leads a lot of people to injury or, you know, or just kind of inflammation. And so that's one of the reasons why we definitely want to always make sure you warm up. Like you don't, you know, if you look at like an Olympic sprinter, you will rarely ever find them just hop out on the track and go as fast as they possibly can, because they're going to tear something, right? And the reason that they have to warm up is so that they get the fuel going, so their muscles are being fed, and then basically they can, you know, get up to the pace that they normally would go. So the same thing applies to us, and that's why it's really, really important to make sure we warm up. I also just want to touch on one other small thing before we move on from here, and that is just start looking at your daily life too. Like I know I've dealt with a couple tuba players have come to see me, and one of the things that they always talk about is having to like lift the tuba up all the time onto their, you know, and they're going from this tuba, maybe they have both their tubas out, they go to this tuba, and so it's a lot of twisting on your spine. It's also a lot of, you know, lifting, and the same thing goes with your instrument. You know, maybe rather than always putting it on the floor to open the case up, maybe put it on the table, or maybe put it in a chair so it's easier to just open your case. Just small things like that can add up over time. It was just like I found in my life, sleeping, you know, with my arm in a funny position, it obviously messed up my rotator cuff for playing tennis. So some of these kind of things in your daily life could also help. And I also find with a lot of my freelance colleagues that the driving on them really, really wears on them. And so you have to make sure when you buy a car, you know, when you guys are at that point, you buy a car, particularly if you're in it for a lot of time, that, you know, that will kind of aid in being ergonomic for yourself. So those are also important things to look at. We're going to move now actually to the face, and I know this doesn't apply to everybody in the room, but we'll just go through this real quick so all the winds and brass players can kind of understand what's going on. And maybe for the string guys, you might have to actually teach some class with brass players in it someday, so this might be helpful. But there's a couple things to know about your face, and that is that there's this muscle called the orbicularis oris, which runs in a circle around your mouth. And then there's muscles that come in on each side called the buccinator muscles. And the orbicularis oris is really important because it's the only muscle in your entire body that's not directly attached to bone. So it's attached to muscle, which is attached to bone. So you have to be really careful of that muscle. And so this is another reason why you have to make sure for the brass and wind players to really warm up. But I had a friend one time that he didn't take good care of his face, and he basically he strained a muscle in his face, and it ended up tearing. And so it was one of the muscles in the orbicularis oris, and they're really tiny fibers that are that make it up. And so you have to just, again, take really good care of it. But if you take a look at like Dizzy Gillespie, this is how he would play. And so you can see what's happened to him is he didn't, in our world, we call it like holding your corners. And so he would stretch out his buccinator muscle. And so what happens over time, if you think about it, if you put a lot of air in there and you start to stretch it out, that muscle's going to thin out. And so that will also be a lot more cause for potential injury. So you need to also check on that. And I have a lot of kids that come see me with like air pockets all over the place in their face, and you're having to make sure, that they get rid of that, because otherwise it will start to stretch out the muscles. It's not an efficient way to keep your air. One of the things as again, from my athletic background that I was always curious about, particularly, it applies to all instruments, but why we never did like calisthenics or stretching, which was a real big part of my tennis career, was we always had to do, weight training or running or different kind of cross-training events that, as a musician, I was like, why don't we ever do these same type of things? And so I found these two books. They're by the same author, and he's a doctor. He was a sports doctor in Spain, and then he started, I guess he had a few musicians come to see him, and from there what happened was he got into the music side of it, and he wrote this great book called The Musician's Body, and it goes through all the instruments of the orchestra, and I'll let you guys pass around. It's really fun because it's got lots of like crazy cool pictures, and it explains things really well. But so he wrote this book plus another book, which actually this one hasn't been translated to English yet, but it's called Atono. And this book, I'll pass it around so you guys can look at it. But this book, both of the books go through every instrument in the orchestra, and this one was the first one that I finally found that took every instrument and it gave it stretches and calisthenics and different things that you could do to warm yourself up or stretch yourself out if you're on a break that pertain to your instrument. So it would say, you as a violin player are going to use X, Y, and Z muscles, so you need to work on these muscles, as like a cross-training event for your instrument. So it's a really great book. But what I found from this book, finally, were stretches for the face. And I don't know if you guys know Callan, but he was graciously he's a former trombone player from here, but he is graciously my model for this slide. But anyway, and so what you do for this particular exercise is there's six stretches, and we're going to go through them all real quick so you guys can try them. And you're supposed to hold them for 20 seconds each. And your thumb, there's just a couple rules. You hold them for 20 seconds each. Your thumbs go in your corners, and then when you stretch the top muscle, you stretch it like you're frowning, and when you stretch the bottom muscle, you stretch it like you're smiling. And so if you think about your orbicularis oris, think of it a little bit like a diamond shape versus necessarily a circle shape in this particular exercise. So you're thinking about a diamond. So what you're going to do is you're going to basically put your thumbs just above, when you're stretching the upper lip, just above where the corners come together, and when you stretch your bottom lip, just below where the corners come together. So let's try it first. So what you're going to do is put your finger in the middle here, and you're going to put your thumb in the corner, and you're going to pull down. So what you're going to do is you're going to feel the stretch through here, and yeah, it looks good. Everybody looks really good. So yeah, you're going to feel the stretch across there. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to put your fingers like completely in your mouth and pull them that way. You don't want to do that. So you're actually stretching from the outside. Like Jordan, make sure you put it on top. Oh, yeah. Like put it straight on top of you. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Oh, there you go. There you go. Yeah, there you go. And then, but again, pull from the top too. Yeah, and if anybody is like, particularly the winds and brass, if y'all are really interested in this, I can look at your version after class. And then you can do the other side. So you can put the finger in the middle again. You're gonna put it just above the corner here. You're gonna pull straight down like that. And so you're feeling it again across in here. Does that make sense, everybody? Yeah. Okay, and then you're going to put both thumbs right above your corners here. And you're going to pull straight down. So now you're stretching all the way across. So thumbs always go in the corner. So now you're stretching all the way across like that. Does that make sense? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good, good, good. Yeah. I don't recommend doing this in front of a lot of people if you're the only one. It looks kind of funny. All right, and then you're going to put, let's do the bottom one. So you're going to put your finger in the middle, right? And you're going to now stretch up like you're smiling. So you put your thumb in the corner, and you pull straight up. So look like that. Yeah, yeah. Good. Okay, and we'll do the other side. So then finger in the middle, thumb in the corner, and pull straight up like that. So, yeah. Okay, and then the last, and again, we'd hold them for 20 seconds if you're doing this for real. And then you put your thumbs in both corners here, and you can pull them straight up like that. Yeah. Yeah, looks good. Okay, so y'all just stretch your face. So if you've done it right, what happens is you actually, your lips get a little pink. And that means you've basically done it correctly because now the blood's all flowing to your face. So for the winds and brass players, I'd recommend. I mean, if you want to start doing this, you could do this one every single day. And it's a good way just to get everything going. Just if you are going to do it every single day, maybe check with me. I just want to make sure everybody's doing it correctly, so you don't do anything weird. But and it'll just help you kind of get everything flowing. Particularly if you think about it, you know. One of the things you have to do is you have to do the opposite of what you do all the time. So if you're working, and that's what this book goes a lot into, but if you're working, if you're really working every single day and practicing a lot of hours, this is the opposite than what you are doing. So it's why it's helpful. I've also been fortunate enough to work with a woman over the last 2.5 years that has gotten a horse riding accident and was paralyzed in the face. And so for her, when I got her, when she came to Colburn and said, she used to play French horn, and she said, can I start seeing you for French horn lessons? And I kind of figured out her story. I was like, holy cow, we're going to have to start from like really square one to get her face working again. And so we did the other thing in this book, so that's the stretching part of it. The other thing in this book is something called calisthenics, which are strength-building exercises. And if you've ever trained for a sport, they give you calisthenic exercises that might be weight-gaining exercises, or weightlifting exercises, or they might be not weight-gaining exercises, weightlifting exercises. Or calisthenics also, you might just do repetitions with certain parts of your body, like just sit-ups or push-ups or that type of thing. So it doesn't always mean you have to have actual weights. So from this book, they had a set of calisthenics also for your face. And if anybody's interested in those, I can go with you through those as well. But I just wanted to show you kind of what happens. So this is the woman. She was paralyzed on the left side of her face, so your left side of her face. And so before we even started working with her, she couldn't even form her embouchure, and so to even play French horn again. So we started working with her, and you can see just the difference in muscle definition. So you can see how these calisthenic exercises kind of work, which in turn gets her stronger, which helps her with any more injury prevention she might get into. So this particular exercise is called a kiss, and you basically pretend like you're kissing somebody, and you hold it for just like a peck on the cheek kiss, and you hold it for, you do a bunch of repetitions. That's one of the things with weightlifting or calisthenics you'll find is you do a lot of repetitions, and so you hold it for several seconds, and then you do it again, and you repeat the exercise over and over. So I'll just show you 3 versions of this so you can kind of see. But again, this is all from this book, Autono, and they have stuff for every instrument if anybody's interested. So this is, again, on day 1, week 1, you can see it's called a smile. She's just supposed to try to smile. And you can see you can see the amount of teeth that are on the left picture versus the right picture. You can see she's able to close her lips more in that one. And then this one is the one where you can see the most impressive improvement from her. And that is day 1, week 1. This is called the fish. So it's literally just like the kiss, but then you want to show teeth. So you go like that. And so the goal is to show as much teeth as you possibly can. And so you can see here she's able, on this side, to you know, it looks more symmetric. And that's, again, you know, part of the strengthening program that she's on. And if you want to look at it from the side view as well, you can see here that she's able to get her lips farther out from her face in the picture over here, which is 10 weeks later. So if anybody wants to check out this book, they've got stuff for every instrument on calisthenics. So there's also stretches for every instrument and calisthenics for every instrument. But just to kind of recap for the on the face, and this again applies to a lot of different instruments, this part, but the more intense your practice is, the more breaks you're going to need, right? The more you play one direction, like for us, if we play really high, we need the opposite at the end of the day, so we need to do some low playing. One of the things I recommend too, if you're like me or like I was in college, I would just practice nonstop for many, many, many hours, and that was not a good thing. And so I started to just use a timer, and it just would go off, and then basically at that point I knew, okay, it's time to stop practicing, it's time to let's walk around, you know, and then I can come back. And so for me, I had to do this. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but for me, it was one of the only ways I could like just not get lost in practicing and then be there for several hours. And then also set goals for yourself. That's another good way to just make it really efficient. And then we talked about before about visualization. You can do a lot of practice just off your instrument. And then using heat and ice. How many people here use heat and ice ever practicing? Okay, good. So some people already do. What ice does is it reduces inflammation. So if you do have inflammation, you want to use ice. What heat does is it relaxes your muscles and gets the blood flow going. And so what I always recommend is if you're going to use those two things, you want to use heat at the beginning of your day and ice at the end of your day, and only if you're really like truly injured. And again, I would talk to the wellness team here if you are, but they would probably recommend that you do a combination of both of those two things throughout your day. But oftentimes if I have like a really, really hard playing day, then what I do at the end of the day is I'll come home at night and ice my chops. You know, I just put a few, wrap some ice in a couple pieces of paper towel and put it on my face, and then I do that for 5 minutes and repeat it twice, and that's, you know, and then that helps a lot with inflammation for the next day. Some people take vitamin E supplements, or also some people will, for brass or wind, will actually break a vitamin E capsule up and put it straight on their lips, because vitamin E is the thing that reduces inflammation, so you might want to look into that too if you have a lot of inflammation. Or some people also take anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen or that type of thing. So that's another option if you guys have that. I want to move from here on to your ears. There just are a couple things to know about your ears when you're looking into earplugs. How many of you guys use earplugs? Okay, so a lot of string players. A lot of string you're using earplugs. So like I keep mine, they're always in my horn. I have them with me all the time because I never know, A, who's going to be sitting on my left, what loud horn player I'm going to have to play next to, or how close to the percussion I have to get, right? And then oftentimes if we're doing studio, like recording stuff, we have to wear headsets. And so there's a couple studios that actually don't have volume knobs for us. And so what I do is, if that's the case, then I'll put one earplug underneath my headset. And so I'll actually have one earplug here and no earplug and no headset on that side, because the headset can get so loud and sometimes you can't control it. So that's something else that it's just always good to have the earplugs around. And oftentimes too, when I go to the movie theaters, I'll take a pair of earplugs with me, particularly in LA. For some reason, they just crank the volume at the movie theaters. But there's this thing when you look at a pair of earplugs, there's this thing called the NRR for earplugs. It stands for noise reduction rating. And what that means is that's how many decibels get cut out by those earplugs. So the average ones, like the ones that I have here in my horn, these are just average, and that's 32. It's 32 decibels get cut out by those. The only catch is that when you cut decibels out, you're cutting out highs and lows, but mostly highs. And so if you go buy custom earplugs, what those do is they kind of make the ratio between cutting out the highs and the lows more equal. And so it's more like what you would actually hear, but just at a lesser volume if you have custom earplugs. So when you wear the kind of the cheaper version of them, it's going to cut out way more highs, and then when you wear the custom ones, it'll cut out more equally. And they come with filters, and so you can replace the filter and put like a 9 decibel filter in, or maybe a 15 one. It just depends on kind of what kind of plugs you buy. And then if you guys ever go or do, like if you ever end up going on tour, you have to get what they call in-ear monitors, and those monitors, they cut out everything, and you only get to hear what what they're feeding you through the monitors. So they're really, really important. If you guys ever go on tour, one of the things to state up front is you want them to buy you in-ear monitors. They're about $900. And so, yeah, they get really expensive. They can get even more expensive than that. But the cool thing is you can pick your color and like, do your own little thing to them. But yeah, so they get pretty, like, well, you can put pictures on them and all kinds of fun stuff. Like they're kind of neat, but they get pretty expensive. And the custom earplugs run about $200. And usually for some reason, if you knew you were going on tour or whatnot, you can go and they have a deal where you usually can get both the custom and the in-ears for a cheaper price. So that's something you might want to, the custom ones, something you guys might all want to look into at some point. They're just really great to have around if you don't want to carry the other ones with you, or maybe if you want to try to get the decibels so that the highs and the lows are more equal. I don't know if you guys have seen, there's a great article that's been going around on Facebook lately, and it's done by the University of Queensland in Australia, and they did a huge study of musicians and musicians' hearing, and I mean, it just basically says we have to take care of our hearing, but it is a great article if you guys want to take the time to read it. I've seen it on probably, I don't know, at least 30 or 40 musicians' Facebooks, and if you can't find it, let me know, and I'll send it to you guys so you can read it. There's this other thing I should mention before we start wrapping up, and that's called tinnitus. Does anybody? Yeah, it's like ringing in your ears. Has anybody heard of that before? Yeah. It's what it is it's really, like, sometimes if you, I don't know, for me, if I'm just like walking around or even sitting, just sometimes I'll get this really high-pitched sound in my ear, and it just hangs around for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, and then it goes away. Some people have that all the time. I hope none of you guys have it, but some people actually have that all the time, and it's there, constantly. And so it's what they say is that some people can actually have it and the hearing is actually really good, and some people can have it and their hearing is really bad. So if you do get it, you should go or have it. It can be it's usually because of loss of hearing, but you should go get it checked out to kind of see if there's anything you can do about it. And I've read in a couple of books that people, if you really increase your vitamin supplement, I don't know how really true this is, but I have read it in a couple places. If you increase like I think it's vitamin B and zinc and I think it's just vitamin B and zinc, but if you increase those a lot in your diet, it will actually help lessen it or maybe even get rid of it. So it's something, if you do have it, it's something to look into. But for everybody that doesn't have it, that's why we want to take care of our ears as much as you can. So also take into account, obviously if you're in this room practicing, particularly by yourself, you probably don't need earplugs. But if you're in a small practice room and let's say you had 6 or 7 people in there and you're all playing, obviously at that point you might want to think about having some type of ear protection when you do that. So does anybody have any questions about ears before we move on? Yeah.
How loud is the high?
It's noticeable. Oh, yeah, you definitely know. You just basically hear this. It sounds like, have you ever heard like on TV when they have the warnings for like it sounds like that, but all the time. Yeah. So yeah.
I was wondering how many, I guess this article has some studies that have been done on musicians, but is it prevalent across all instruments that people have hearing?
Yeah, and think about your instrument too. Like, where is it located to which ear? The study actually goes into French horn players and their hearing loss in their right ear. But I would think for violin, you guys would be more to your left ear. I think it's, and it talks about that a good bit. But it's a great article. And the thing to take note of is that I think it's a pain. I think you start to feel pain, like, oh wow, this is loud, around 120 decibels, and then you have the instant hearing loss starts around 140 decibels, and just a normal conversation you have with somebody is about 60 decibels. So that kind of gives you like a a range. But one of the things you want to just make, I mean, I don't know, I was kind of fascinated by this once, and I actually bought a decibel reader. I call it a decibelometer. I don't know if that's the real word for it. But anyway, I would carry it around with me and just to kind of test and see how loud things were, because I found it kind of fascinating. But the article's good. If you want to read it out, I can send it to you. Okay, so from here, just if for some reason you guys are, feeling like you want to look into ergonomics more, or you want to kind of look at yourself more, I just wanted to throw out, there's basically, you've got a lot of traditional medicine, more Western medicine folks. There's a Performing Arts Medicine Association, which has a great website, and they've got a great list of doctors who specialize in everything in the performing arts, from dance to music to art. And then they've also got a whole set of music specialists. They're doctors that really just specialize in music, in musicians and kind of different problems that they see. And the one thing I just want to say is when I had my injury, I got a lot of different opinions, and that was probably the smartest thing I did, even though I didn't really know exactly what I was doing at the time, because I had some people that said, oh, you have to have surgery, and I had some people that said, you'll never be able to play horn again, and I had some people say, oh, you need to take a year and a half off, and then you'll be fine, so I got a lot of different opinions, and that was how I was able to kind of figure out my own way. But I think for you guys, if somebody says you need surgery, really get multiple opinions before you go through with that, because there's also been a lot of musicians who've had that and haven't come back from it as well as they could have if they hadn't gone that route, or maybe tried other things. So, and then there's also alternative medicine and therapy, and so we've got obviously massage therapy, which Kate Fox does here, chiropractic, physical therapy, which is Erin Carr, and Erin specializes too a lot in like inflammation. So she deals, if you have a lot of inflammation in your body, she helps you kind of get rid of that also. Acupuncture, acupressure, Chinese medicine, reflexology of the foot. There's a thing called myotherapy, which is dealing with trigger points. There's a whole system called Rolfing, which is it's really intense. I don't even exactly know I've never had it done, but from what I understand, it's really intense massage / like getting into your nervous system almost. And then there's Alexander Technique, which I don't know if any of you guys were able to go to the class. You went, didn't you, Elise, to the Alexander Technique class? Yeah. So what did you get from that? Did you find that? Sorry, I'm good.
Your body is symmetrical, and
Yes. How you're holding the horn. Did anybody else go to that class, the Alexander Technique class? Okay. Did you guys? Was it helpful? Was it helpful? Okay. Yeah, so it's like Elise is saying, it's like learning how to bring your horn, to your, it's kind of what we've been talking about all day, but learning how to bring your horn to yourself versus bringing, bringing yourself to the horn. And so applied kinesiology, Feldenkrais, body mapping, these are all other alternative medicines and therapies. And so I want to just go ahead and open the floor now for questions, if anybody has any questions before we wrap everything up. Does anybody else have questions about anything we've talked about today?
What did you end up doing?
For me, it was two things. It was basically making sure that I gave myself neutral, like the neutral position when I was practicing a lot, just taking breaks and like making sure I was keeping my arms by my side. And the other thing was finding the bell extender and getting the right size chair.
So you kept playing?
I kept playing. Yeah, I kept playing. I mean, it was painful for a while until I was able to work through it. I reduced the amount of playing for a long stint of time. I did a lot of practicing without my horn. But yeah, I just had to minimize it as much as I could. So yeah, and so you are able to work through it if you have the right people behind you and you take a good approach to it. Does anybody else have any questions? Yeah, Estelle.
you're talking about when you're sleeping, you had to fasten your arms. How long did it take before you didn't have to use that?
Change that? It was pretty quick, actually. It was just one of those things where I just had to be aware of it more. And then when I started learning to sleep with them by my side. Like when I would fall asleep, I just made sure they were right here. And then I would say it probably just took like a week or two. And then I'm still, even to this day, I'm really conscious of it. Just making sure I fall asleep with my arms here and not like, in some weird position. So yeah. Do you think you do Something funky. Yeah, I mean, yeah, sometimes, yeah, sometimes you have somebody watch you. I mean, it's weird, but you have to have somebody watch you sleep too, because you don't know, you know. Yeah, it's kind of, that's where my parents were helpful in that state. But yeah, anybody else have any questions? Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I think that's it. So thank you guys so much, and yeah.